Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our presentation of Digital Habits of Public Library Members. I'm Jamie Machik with the Nicolay Federated Library System, and I'm happy all of you are here today. We're going to try this again, round two. For those of you who were with us a week ago, we were in about 10 to 15 minutes of the presentation when a fire alarm went off in the building where our presenters are, and we had to postpone and reschedule the presentation, and which, all of you were great about it, and those things happen, and I'm just very pleased that we were able to reschedule this presentation. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here. So with me today is Deirdre Costello, who's the Senior User Experience Researcher at EBSCO, and Christy Showman-Farrer, who's the Director of Product Management for School and Public Libraries at EBSCO. Both of them have a ton of library experience. They're great at giving presentations, and I'm very excited to continue listening to their presentation today. So whenever you two are ready, feel free to begin.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And I just want to thank everyone for giving us a second chance. We're so sorry about what happened last week. It was outside of our control, but I can't believe how gracious you all are. We really, really appreciate it. So welcome to round two of Digital Habits with Public Library Members. Hopefully this will go seamlessly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christy, as Jamie mentioned. I'm a librarian. I was a children's and teen librarian for many years before starting to work at EBSCO. I'm also have a master's in education. I'm a photographer, and I love doing cookie and cupcake decorating programs at libraries.
And I'm Deirdre. I am a librarian. I'm a UX researcher here at EBSCO. I'm also an avid horseback rider, a Batman expert, and an animal rights advocate, so I'm more than happy to talk to you about any of those things, and we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. Just as willing to answer questions about Batman as I am to answer questions about public libraries. Okay, so we are here to talk to you today about EBSCO's recent public library contextual inquiry. So what is contextual inquiry, or as we call it, CI? CI is an ethnographic methodology. So when Jane Goodall lived with the chimps, lived and breathed what they lived and breathed, that was contextual inquiry. We did not live with our participants, but I hope you'll agree we got some great data out of this study. It does yield rich qualitative data, and every hour and a half to 2 hour participant-led session starts with one question. And for this study, that question was, tell me about the last time you used your public library. So for this public library CI, we talked to 28 participants who represented 8 states, and we also read over 30 articles. So here on EBSCO's user research team, we really focus on qualitative methodologies. Those are really our forte. So when we do a deep dive on an audience like public library members, we want to pair that with a literature review that covers both qualitative and quantitative data so that we make sure our findings match up with what other people have found, make sure we're asking the right questions. And so we looked really heavily at Pew's findings about public library users, and I hope that you'll agree, so I spoke to Lee Rainey actually about our findings, and he and I talked about how, Pew is very quantitative focused, and they have a handle on the behaviors of public library users. But what our study gets at is the why behind some of those behaviors. So I hope you'll agree our findings line up very interestingly with Pew's and give another perspective. Okay, so let's jump right into this data. And as I mentioned last week, we're going to talk about a number of spectrums, like the spectrum of avid to casual readers that we'll talk about now. I tend to talk about the endpoints on those spectrums, but there is absolutely room in the middle for a number of behaviors that are kind of in between. And the other thing is, no person is one end of the spectrum all the time. So for instance, you can be an avid reader for some genres, like science fiction and fantasy, but a casual reader in other genres, like the stuff you should be reading for work. That I just described myself. Which brings us to another point. You may see yourself in this data. You may see the people who use your library in this data. You may not. This data is in aggregate from our 28 participants. So it may not, you may have stories that match up very well with the data or stories that don't match up with the data at all. And that's because we're looking at it from a 1,000-foot view. Okay, so let's talk about avid versus casual readership. Duncan Smith of Novelist, when he started looking at the data that we were pulling out of these sessions, said, we really have this spectrum of avid readers who are actively seeking out what to read next to casual readers who are a little more laissez-faire about it. So casual readers use what one participant described as their own personal echo chamber to figure out what they're going to read next. And what that echo chamber means is they hear about a book once, whether it be on social media, from coworkers, from friends and family, and that first hearing sort of falls by the wayside. They don't always pursue the book right away. It's not until they hear about it a second or even a third time that they say, okay, this book has come up several times in my own personal echo chamber. I'm getting the message that I need to seek this book out and read it. A couple things are true for both avid and casual readers, but they mean different things for those kinds of readers. Everyone wants to read what is popular. For an avid reader, that means that they actually want to have read it before everyone else starts talking about it. They want to be the first. Whereas a casual reader will wait until something is already popular and say, oh, other people are reading this, I probably should too. Friends and family are a major source of recommendations for avid and casual readers. For avid readers, that means that they are taking those recommendations with a grain of salt and actually doing some research to make sure the book that's recommended is worth their time before they're reading it, whereas casual readers just count that as one of the readings that contributes to their echo chamber. Avid readers also have sources they trust. So we heard a lot about NPR over the course of this study, both the author interviews on the radio and the book carousel that NPR has recently implemented, where you can go to their website and see all the books that have been mentioned on air. We heard from participants who are following book reviews, which I thought was sort of specific to people in our field. We also heard a lot about the New York Times review of books, which again I was a little surprised by. Because I think of that as sort of an advanced method for finding books, but we heard about it quite a bit. Avid readers are also following things they like, whether that be a specific series, a specific genre, or an author that they're enamored with. And often that means that they are going to the author's website to figure out when the next book in a series is going to come out or when the next book by that author is going to come out. Avid readers are also using systems that get them. So we heard from people who have a relationship with their Kindle who value the recommendations, which are really ads, but they see them as recommendations that the Kindle serves up when they open it. We heard from several participants who had put a lot of time and energy into inputting data into Goodreads so that the recommendations that Goodreads served up would be valuable to them. Another sign that you are dealing with an avid reader is the presence of a to-read list. And that to-read list can take a number of forms. It can be a piece of paper in someone's wallet. It can be the use of the Amazon wish list to track books that they want to read and haven't read yet, whether or not they intend to purchase those books from Amazon. But the majority of participants we talked to who did keep a to-read list, they kept it in the Notes app on their phone. Okay, so let's imagine that whether you're talking about an avid or a casual reader, a book has been discovered and it's time to seek out that book and read it. What comes next? Well, now there's a decision about whether to buy the book or whether to borrow it. So let's talk about some of the factors that go into that decision. So when people buy books, money often comes up as something that's really important because people who like to buy books often feel like they're spending their money with a purpose. They are supporting their local independent bookstore. They are supporting the publishing industry, or they're buying from the used bookstore that's associated with their library, so they see themselves as spending money in service of their library. For some people, they're buying because the library's rules just don't work for them. We talked to one participant who she can't help herself. She spills coffee all over every book that she reads, and she doesn't want to do that to a library book, so she buys books instead. But for some people, there is this physical pain associated with returning a book to the library. They have spent significant time with this book. They've developed a relationship with it. It actually hurts them to return it to the library after that 2 weeks, that 3 weeks, whatever that loan period is. Some people love physical books. And again, I want to remind here that this is going to be true for some genres, for some people in some genres, but not true across the board. For instance, we heard from some people who are much more willing to buy a copy of James Joyce's Ulysses, even if they don't think they're going to read all the way through it, and have that on their bookshelf when people come to dinner, as opposed to the copy of 50 Shades of Grey that they're getting from the library and secretly reading in their bedroom. I am not hating on 50 Shades of Grey. It just came up a lot as an example over the course of this study. Some people love the bookstore experience. We talked to one participant who she and her son go to Barnes & Noble every Friday night after the library is closed, and they have kind of a date night. You know, they browse the book covers, they pick out something to read, they get something to drink, and they sit and read it together. And for some people, Amazon is just a reflex. They figure out something that they want, they buy it on Amazon, and they're done. Okay, so let's talk about the decision to borrow a book from the library instead of buy it. Again, money comes up as important. We heard from several participants explicitly said, I love money. Why would I buy something when I can get it from the public library for free? Some people don't want physical books or see physical books as an inconvenience. We heard this primarily from senior citizens who were starting the process of getting rid of the books that they'd accumulated over a lifetime, but also from 20-somethings who were really taxing the patience of their friends when every year they'd ask them to move and they'd ask for help moving, and those friends would be carrying, 17 boxes of books up to a 7th floor walk-up. And then for some people, they just love their public library. They have a very strong attachment to it, and they understand that to borrow from the public library is to show support from the public library. So they're actually never going to buy a book because they always get them from the library. Okay, so imagine that the decision has been made to seek out a book at the library. What happens next? Google. Every participant that we saw go to their public library website got there this way. They would Google library and often the name of their town. Even if the public library had a name that was separate from the name of their town, this was the primary method of getting to the library website. Once on the library website, they would make a beeline for the catalog search that was often front and center on the library website and search for the title of a book that they had discovered somewhere else using one of those book discovery methods that we talked about. Okay, so I mentioned that avid and casual readers all want to read what's popular. There's sort of a zeitgeist thing going on, which means that often what they want to read isn't going to immediately be available via the library. And so this is the first round of what we started calling library math, and it goes like this. Okay, I want to read The Girl on the Train. There are 27 holds on it. But I can see that my consortium actually has 9 copies, so instead of 27th in line, I'm really 3rd in line. So I know that the loan period is 2 weeks. If I assume that everyone reads it and returns it within that 2-week period, worst case scenario, I have to wait 6 weeks. If that is not an acceptable amount of time, if they absolutely have to read The Girl on the Train before 6 weeks is up, that triggers a buy response. If that is acceptable, there's another piece of that decision, which is format. So we talked to some participants who really are attached to the physical format and won't read an ebook. And we talked to some participants who are really attached to an ebook and won't read a physical book. Often the people who are attached to the physical format talk about the tactile experience of reading. And people who are attached to their e-reader love them because they can read at night without turning a light on and disturbing their partner in bed. That said, for the people who really felt deeply one way or another, there was this sense that they could do what they wanted. And this was the point at which Game of Thrones came up a lot as an example. So Game of Thrones is, there are a ton of characters. Each character belongs to a family. They pay homage to a lord. They have a flag. They have a motto. They have a house. Like, there's a whole context for every conversation that you need to really understand what's going on, which means that you're constantly flipping back and forth to the appendices to figure out, like, what's this guy's house's words? Does he believe in dragons? All that stuff. For the people who really say, I love physical books, I'll never read an ebook, they feel strongly that that flipping back and forth, that navigation, is easier in physical format. For the people who truly love ebooks, they feel that that navigation is easier in an ebook. So there's this idea that I prefer this format or that format because I can do what I want with that format and I can't in any other format. That said, there are also some people who are truly format agnostic. They can get pleasure from a book no matter what format it's in. But most of the time people say they're format agnostic, but what they really mean is, I'll take any format as long as it's first. So we talked to one participant who really, really, really needed to read Queen Sugar because she hadn't read it yet and she had book club the next week. Her preferred format is the physical format. She couldn't get that right away, so she took the audiobook. As soon as the physical book came in for her, the audiobook went out the window. But She wanted to get the book, so she took whichever format she could get first. Okay, so let's say the user has decided that that 6-week wait time for Roll on the Train is fine. What happens next? They log in, put in their barcode so that they can put it on hold. For the people that we saw go through this workflow who are regular users of the library, the majority of them have their library barcode memorized, not saved in the browser, memorized. And they said they had it memorized because they were logging in every day to check the progress of their holds. And this is the second round of library math, and it goes like this. Okay, I'm almost done with the Goldfinch. I think I'm going to be done by Wednesday. What I really want to read next is Station 11, but I'm not sure it's in for me yet. Let me check. No, looks like there are still 2 holds on it. There's no way I'm going to have that by Wednesday, and it is totally unacceptable for me to finish the Goldfinch, put it down, and not have a book that is ready to go immediately. So I need to find something else from the library that's available right away to fill that gap. And then when that book does come in, we heard this moment described as Christmas, a party, the best moment of my day, and that is because reading is still very much a special experience. So Dr. Marianne Wolf of Tufts University is the author of a book called Proust and the Squid, and she talks a lot about the fact that the way we read online is changing our neurology, and our tolerance for long pieces of text is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And that is, for the most part, true in terms of the way we read online, but reading, diving into a book and thoroughly enjoying it, that is not going away. Participants described reading to us as associated with leisure time. They read significantly more on vacation. They are carving out chunks of time in their day that are special, that are just for them, and that are dedicated to reading. Over a cup of coffee in the morning, just before bed, on a rainy Sunday under a blanket on their couch. And we talked to a number of binge readers, readers who are so addicted to a book that they can't put it down. We talked to one participant who's a personal trainer, and she says, you know, when a book is really good, I bring it with me and I snack on it in those 5-minute breaks between clients. So that is the primary workflow that our participants associated with the public library, finding books they had discovered and then checking those out, usually using the hold system process. I am now going to kick it to Christy, who's going to talk about how people engage and disengage with the public library over the course of their lives.
Thank you, Deirdre. So yes, I'm going to talk about the timeline, what we came to talk about as the library milestones. As a former public librarian, I actually found this part to be very validating for what I used to see in the public library. So a lot of what I'm going to say probably you're going to be nodding with. Usually when we're in a room and we're giving this presentation, it's really good to get that feedback, but I'll just pretend I see you nodding. And I just muted myself, sorry about that. Wrong clicker. So we're going to start at the very beginning. We talked to a number of participants, and one of the questions that we asked them through the course of our conversation was, tell us about your first memory with the public library. And for so many of them, that was story time. Parents bring their kids into the public library looking for something to do, looking for books, to fill time, to have a play space, and to have an interaction with other children and other parents. And story time really sets the stage for people who become lifelong library users. When you think about it, though, those students, those kids who are coming into story time really are passive participants in there. They're being brought in by their parents, and they're really not having a huge amount of say in whether or not they're coming to the library, but they do come away with a really strong positive correlation and positive memory of the library with that story time experience. As kids get older and move up through middle school, that elementary through middle school time also is really high time of engagement. There are after-school programs, summer reading program, and homework assignments. We talked to one participant who said that she took her son to the public library every summer for summer reading, and they were really, really engaged in the library during that time because it was a big part of their summer experience, and because it often tied back to schools. We also had a participant who actually was a librarian, and she worked very hard to get her students to have library cards because she saw the library as integral to the education of her students. as kids get a little bit older, if you have high school students, you probably have seen this, they tend to get busier. There are after-school activities. They might have an after-school job. Their classes are getting harder, and this tends to be a period of disengagement from the public library. For the most part, many of them, they have access to a school library where they have resources that they may be able to use to do their homework, and so they're not using the public library as often. That same participant who told us about her son being in summer reading program said she actually hadn't used the library much now that her son was in middle school and high school because they weren't part of the summer reading program anymore. This period of disengagement tends to move up through college, especially if a library member has moved away from their hometown and are in a new community. One of our participants, when asked when was the last time that you interacted with your public library, said, I think I walk by the library, but I'm not really sure. She didn't even really know where her public library was because she was so involved in her college community and her college library that the public library wasn't even in her spectrum, in her universe, and she just wasn't aware of what was going on in her community. So when do people start getting re-engaged in the public library? There are a number of different transitions in life and milestones that pull people back into the public library. Again, this is probably very familiar to all of you. One is moving to a new community. And we had one participant who mentioned that when she moved to a new community, she actually got a flyer in her mail of public library events, and she found that really helpful as a way to anchor herself in that community. And people tend to seek out the public library as a source of information and as a source of community when they're in a new area because they know that the library is that hub of information for a community. Having children also is a big milestone as an adult and also a big way of bringing people back into the public library. Just as with kids who are going to story time, their parents are re-engaging in the public library because they're having to take their children there. And also seeking out the library for resources, for things to do. I mean, if you were in New England last winter and you were able to actually get out of your house in our 100 inches of snow, the public library was a really wonderful place to go. Another milestone that tends to bring people back to the library is job loss. Public libraries across the country are sources of information for careers and job transition. I know that when I was a public librarian, I saw this a lot, and we had a couple of different librarian participants, and one mentioned that he had a public library member come into the library specifically to apply to a job, and he had never applied for a job online before, but it was because of the way that things have changed in the job market. Many people who had gotten a job because they walked into a store and applied now have to go online and set up an email account and learn how that whole system works in order to be able to apply for a job. We also had a participant who had lost her job, and she built the public library into her daily routine. She did use it for resources for finding a job, but actually it was more importantly a way to keep her having a daily routine that kept her sane and kept her feeling like she was working. And so every morning she'd get up, go to the public library, do a little bit of job searching work, and then go about the rest of her day. So we heard from a number of people that as their children's age, they actually weren't as involved in the public library. They didn't need to take their kids to do homework. They weren't taking them to story time, and they found themselves becoming less engaged. That wasn't true, however, for people who had made a connection with their public librarian. So, when their kids were younger, had a personal connection with somebody who worked at the desk or who had asked for specific recommendations, or if they became involved as a library trustee or with the Friends of the Library. But overall, people did tend to get less engaged as their children got older and moved out of the house. And again, to bring full circle, participants definitely were more engaged once they retired. For many people, it's because they have more time. They're looking for a way of getting more information, learning a new skill, learning things that they didn't learn before. We had one participant who was an engineer by trade. He had gone to MIT, and all of his courses were science courses at the time. And as soon as he retired, he realized that he had a gap in his liberal arts education. And so in order to fill that in, he went to the public library. So those are just a couple of examples of the library milestones and how people are engaged and disengaged throughout that time. I'm going to pass it back over to Deirdre.
Thank you, Christy. So I'm going to talk about a section that I like to call What's Up, and that is because it is about how people find out what's up, what's of interest to them in their communities and specifically in their libraries. So the first is I'm social, and I don't just mean social media, although Facebook and Twitter, for the people who use them regularly, are a source of information about their own communities. But I'm also talking about friends, about face-to-face interactions with neighbors and family members, and email. People email each other constantly about what's going on this weekend. Also, people are getting newsletters and other community communications in their email. I'm online. So people have trusted sites that they go to, much like newsletters. They're going to those online newsletters. They're going to local town news sites. For younger participants, by which I mean 35 and under, we also saw a lot of them using Google, and they would do it. It looked like this. Googling name of my town or name of city, what to do this weekend. So that was how they were finding out what was going on in their community via Google. We also heard a strong preference for apps that push information to the home screen of a smartphone. So rather than having to open the phone, navigate to an app, go into the app, and then navigate there for information, people are setting their preferences so that certain information gets pushed directly to them. The New York Times we heard about Flipboard, but the app that we heard the most about was Bleacher Report, which is an app for sports fans. And you can pick which teams you follow, and then it will push updates about how those teams are doing to your phone. So we did sessions in both Boston and San Francisco, so we heard a lot about the Giants and the Red Sox. We also heard from one hockey fan in San Francisco who uses Bleacher Report to follow the San Jose Sharks, but she also follows the Giants. She could not care less about baseball, but when the Giants have a home game win, they set off a huge fireworks display, and her dog is terrified of fireworks, so she uses the app to figure out when she needs to medicate her dog appropriately. We also heard this really interesting new openness to online ad experiences, tailored ad experiences. And if we'd done this study a couple of years ago, I think we would have found something very different. But the algorithms that services like Google, Facebook, Twitter are starting to use to really nail those targeted ads are getting so good that the reaction we heard was actually, I know this is an ad and I wish it wasn't here because I feel like I'm being manipulated, but gosh darn it, it is so relevant that I can't help but click on it. We also heard a lot about what I think of as more traditional news sources. Radio, so news radio, both local and national. Newspapers, again, both local and national, in paper and online. And flyers in the mailbox. People really love getting stuff in the mail, and I think that the power of that communication method is undervalued. So we heard from several people in Somerville Somerville has a really great online or adult education center, and they send out a quarterly course catalog, and several of our participants say, I get the course catalog and I immediately choose which courses I'm going to take. It's not even a question that I'm going to take them. I love getting it. We also heard from one participant who moved to a new town, and she got a brochure in the mail from her public library saying, welcome to the community, here are all the services the public library offers. I have no idea how that public library got the information that she had moved to the community or what her address was, but she found it really valuable. She went directly to the library, do not pass go, and she has a much stronger relationship with the library in her new community than she did with the library in her old community. And finally, I'm in the library. This one gets a gold star because I think, as you probably know, marketing what's going on in the library actually in the library is the best way to market what's going on in the library. But it's a catch-22 because then you're marketing to people who are already in the library. But we heard participants talk about the power of posters. This person didn't know that we worked for EBSCO and also didn't know that Flipster was an EBSCO product, so this wasn't a connection that he was making. But he talked to us about a poster he had seen for Flipster that said, "What's Flipster? Ask your librarian." He asked his librarian, and now he's an avid user. A lot of participants talked about the display tables in libraries, which is something that libraries have borrowed from bookstores. And what they said was, a lot of participants were coming in to pick up things that they had on hold. Their reading dance card was already full. They didn't have room for anything else. But they walked by something on a display table that was so appealing that they just had to pick it up. Talked a lot about signage. We heard about one public library that got a grant for large, not very expensive monitors that they put within eyesight of people walking in the door of the library, and they're using that to advertise their digital resources. And they've seen a jump in usage that they're tying to that signage. And lastly, the librarian. I think you'll probably agree that the librarian tends to be the most undervalued resource in the library. And it is often not because librarians aren't helpful, not because librarians aren't smart, not because librarians don't know how to do their job, but because people are nervous to approach librarians. They don't make the connection that the librarian, the smart, helpful librarian who is great at their job, is actually there to help them. And when we ask them, when you're struggling with research or when you have a question, where do you go? And the answer is almost never the librarian. And when we ask, well, why don't you ask the librarian? They say, well, I think the librarian's too busy. And then when you ask, well, what do you think the librarian is too busy doing? Well, I don't know, taking care of the books. They don't make the connection that the librarian isn't there just for the books, but the librarian is there for them. And the kind of foot in the door that we heard to overcoming that understanding is what Christy mentioned earlier. It's that personal connection to a librarian. And it can start with as small an interaction as a kind of upsell at checkout. So someone is checking something out, and the librarian says, oh, this book was really great. If you like this, you might try X. And all of a sudden, the librarian is this person who not only knows a lot about books, but can recommend books to them. Overall, we heard from participants that there is this sense that they know the library offers more than they're really taking advantage of, and they wish they knew more so that they could take advantage of it. We had two separate participants, both of whom are really interested in ebooks and audiobooks, but they had this perception that they had to go to the physical library to get those ebooks and those audiobooks. They're thinking audiobooks on CD that they can play in their car. And when I said totally separate libraries, different parts of the country, but I happen to know that both of their public libraries offered Overdrive. I said, did you know that your library offers ebooks and audiobooks that you can access from home? They both said, okay, stop recording, put down your pen, stop taking notes. I need you to show me how to do that immediately. They were so excited. So as a researcher, I probably should not have stopped the session to show them how to do that, but as a librarian, I really couldn't help myself. So that's what's up. And now I am going to kick it back to Christy, who's going to talk about how we put this all together.
So we just gave you a lot of information about how people are using their public libraries. What do you do with that? What we actually ended up doing is we pulled a couple of groups of people together from our company, all of whom had either participated as researchers in this study or who were public library users. And we wanted to come up with ideas. We call these ideation sessions. There are a couple of different techniques that we have that we're going to share with you that you can actually do at your own libraries to come up with ideas that may help you use this data to better serve your members. So one of these techniques is something that Deirdre actually brought back from a workshop, a conference she went to in the UK, and it's called 685. And the basics is that you get 6 to 8 Post-it notes, and you have 5 minutes to look at all of the information, look at all these ideas, and come up with your own ideas. 6 to 8 ideas in 5 minutes sounds like it's okay, but it actually was a little bit terrified, and my anxiety level went up. But what we ended up getting was a lot of Post-it notes. And what did we do with those notes? We took them and we put them on 2 different axes in a quadrant where we ranked them from easy to hard and unique to conventional. So some examples are, things that are really easy to do that you can do right now, but are things that everybody is doing. And then these are classed as how, wow, and now. So the now are the easy conventional. Those are the things like doing flyers, putting up a book display, a local event on library property. The wows are the easy and unique. Those are things that people aren't really doing and would be really exciting, and you should probably do them right now. One that actually I know a couple libraries are doing these days, but borrowing cookware. The Brookline Public Library here in Massachusetts just started loaning out cake pans, and everybody's super excited because at least in this area, nobody had heard of that before. And then I have the how. Those are things that are a little bit harder, but are so unique that really would blow people's minds. Those are the things that nobody actually thought that they might need. One of my favorite ones of that was a hologram librarian. But another one was having a no dead dogs filter in the catalog. People mentioned every time they read a book, they didn't want to read a book about dead dogs. So if you had a no dead dogs filter in the catalog, that would be really cool, but we're not quite sure how to get there yet. So then we went from all of these ideas and all these Post-it notes on our How, Wow, Now quadrants, and I categorized them, and I'm going to share a number of ideas with you. So we categorized 4 different areas. The first one was bring people in. Now this is based on the idea that the most effective marketing that public libraries do are to people who are in the library. So you need to get them into the library. And one of the really great ways to do that is to provide services that people need to do anyway, but have them at the public library. So one of the ideas that came out of our session was actually offering passport photos in the library. That tends to be a community need, especially if you're in an area where people travel a lot or you're near a border, and it's hard to find that location. So doing it in the library would help bring people in. Another was CSA pickups, a community-sponsored agriculture, if you have that in your area, allow them to do it on library property. Another one, actually, which is kind of in the how or wow category, depending on your tech savviness, but is using circ stats to find overall interests of your community and then program around that. So thinking like a business in that regard, and looking at the analytics of your community and then picking something in that category to bring people in. There are ideas of doing the trick-or-treat stations at the library or art display and art events, and then also voting. I know having voting at your library can be a little chaotic, but if you have the opportunity to do that, it's a wonderful way to get people into the library who might not already be there. So meet people on the timeline. This is probably the easiest way to get your high impact user, your regularly involved people back into the library, but you can also think about those people in your community who aren't necessarily using the library very much. Your high school, your college students, your adults who have older children, and think about ways to get them into the library. For people, some of the examples from that were having library info in new baby packets at hospitals. People who are having children are going to want to come into the library, so you might as well give them that information right up front. Having an app for library events with personalized push notifications to get college students and young adults back into the library. Doing a college financial aid night at the public library, getting some of those high school and college students back in to see what library resources you have. And then also partnering with your local colleges. I know that we have a number of colleges in the Boston area that have, Simmons College, which is actually where I went for library school, they had what was called Leisure Reads collection, but for the most part, academic libraries don't always have really great, fun collections. So if public libraries partner with the colleges to either offer programming or offer collections, that would be a great way of pulling some college students back into your community. As Deirdre mentioned, one of the best underutilized resources in the library are your librarians. And so we highly recommend marketing your librarians. And we have a number of ideas that came out of our ideation session which spoke to that, and really highlighting the people who work in your library. A great statistic I got recently was that your librarians are about 60 to 70% of your annual budget. You really need to talk about them, to advocate for them, and to market them, and get that return on the investment that you're already putting in. One way of doing that is doing shelf talkers on your bookshelves. You might already be doing that, but maybe consider putting photos of those librarians there and not just their names, so that people can identify those librarians when they're wandering around the building. There are actually, Multnomah County Library System is doing this now, but having kind of personal librarians. I think they call it My Librarian at Multnomah County. So librarians who offer to send tailored book lists to patrons who sign up for, or who sign up for a librarian newsletter. And also highlight your librarians in displays and newsletters. We have a local library that has a regular display, and each librarian has their own section. So you can walk right into the library and look for the librarian who has similar tastes that you do, and pick from their shelf. And then just a fun one that I saw recently, Fairpoint Public Library in New York actually just had a new video that I saw on social media, and it was about their new library. And if you haven't had a chance to see this, go ahead and go out and Google Fairpoint Public Library. Their video showed the most important items that they were moving to their new library, and it was the librarians, and it was really fun. Library advocates. So people here are social, as Deirdre mentioned. They are talking to their friends. They're on social media. They trust what their friends and families say about their reading and the media. So that's also true about the library. And what better way to get good word of mouth marketing is from advocates. We actually had a participant who is part of a library system in North Carolina that has a frequent flyer program for their events. So you go to a certain number of library events, you get a little punch in your card, and once you go to 10 events, you get to be part of this special group. And it's a great way of engaging people and encouraging them to come to the library more often, and then giving them some sort of incentive and a benefit for being an active participant. Another idea that came out of the sessions was a Facebook advocate group for moms to encourage them to talk about the library, to talk about library events, and encourage their friends with children to come to the library. And then also teen promoters, like band promoters, bring in teens to the library and have them talk about their programs with their friends. So we have a few more minutes. I'm going to talk about our last 3 sections, and I'm going to speed through them a little bit because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So these I could call the ABCs. The first one is animals. Animals are huge. Animals are really popular. And there are many, many ways to engage and bring in animals to the library. One, obviously, is have a library pet. And it doesn't have to be a cat. It doesn't have to be a dog. We have a library here in Massachusetts that has a turtle named Hardcover. It was named by a 6-year-old. And Hardcover brings lots of people into the library to just see her and interact with her. You can also have events for animal lovers or partner with your local humane society or shelter and have an adoption day and have resources about animals. We did also have an idea that came out was called a Yappy Hour, and letting people come to the library, maybe not in the building with their pets, but come to the library lawn perhaps and have an event either with or without their animals. The bookstore. We heard a lot about bookstores during this study, and people really, really love bookstores. And I'd like to say right out off the top of the that we are not competing with bookstores. I think that within the world of reading, that bookstores and libraries both have their place and both have their purpose. But bookstores are really successful in a number of ways, and I think that we could do well as librarians to emulate that a little bit. One is hours. The bookstore hours really are very desirable. People like to be able to go in the evenings, go on the weekends, Sunday hours, or Friday night hours. I know that's hard with budgets, but if you have the ability to be flexible or even have an occasional event where you're open on a Friday night, perhaps for your library advocates, that would be really exciting. The other thing is displays, and Deirdre already mentioned how powerful displays are, but bookstores really do a great job, and we could borrow from that. Food and drink in the library, also very popular. We heard about it from participants as well as people in the ideation sessions. And then also marketing of events. There's a bookstore in the DC area that actually puts their upcoming events on a bookmark, and they put a bookmark in every book that they sell. And that's just such a simple way to let people know what you're doing, especially those library users that Duncan Smith likes to call the drive-by users. They're placing holds from home on their computer, and they're coming in just to pick up a book. Why not put a bookmark in that book and let them know what else the library is doing? And last but not least is collaborate. We are already doing that. I know you're already doing that within your communities, but your library members and people within our study really appreciate when the public library collaborates with other community organizations, and there's room for more. The report said 86% of respondents really think that it's important that the public library be collaborating with schools, and they want that even more than we're doing now. There are so many opportunities to partner with local cable or media groups to provide space and resources for community members to record podcasts and shows, partnering with local printing or copy centers, partnering with real estate agencies to be able to do those flyers for new community members, and other nonprofit organizations throughout your community. So those are the ABCs, and we want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So thank you very much for giving us time, and we will open this up to Jamie and the rest of you.
All right. Thank you, ladies. You definitely gave us a lot of food for thought. So as they mentioned, if you do have questions or comments, feel free to type those in to the question box, and we will get to those. And I'm excited there weren't any fire alarms today happening, that you were able to get through your presentation. I'm just curious.
You and me both.
Yeah. I'm just curious what both of you found in doing this study. I guess, was there anything that surprised you the most about what your findings?
So this is Christy. I'm going to say that as a product manager and somebody who's overseeing the content and development of database products, it was a little surprising that we didn't hear people talking about online resources. I don't think that that's necessarily the death knell for what we do, either in the public libraries and also here at our company, but it was a little surprising. And as side to that, actually, I was pleasantly surprised to hear how much books play a role in people's experience and how excited they are about reading, and that the library brand really is so strongly the book.
I completely agree with Christy, and so there is a lot of data that we gathered that's not represented here, and some of it had to do with how people do research online. In terms of the public library space, we're not talking about college students, we're not talking about doctors, we're not talking about graduate students. People are most often doing research in the course of their jobs to be better at their jobs, to stay current in their field, to understand what the competition is doing. I am a really, I work for a database company, but I'm a huge Googler, so I wasn't super surprised by how much Googling went on. But I was a little surprised at how low the awareness is of how much libraries offer. But I was also pleasantly surprised at the strength of that feeling that I know the library offers more than I'm taking advantage of, and I want to take advantage of more. I'm just not sure how to take that next step. I also, as I mentioned, was really surprised by the openness to tailored ad experiences. I thought that was going to be, we've seen for years that ad experience, no matter how tailored, no matter how seemingly perfect based on analytics, gets rejected over and over and over again. But people are starting to really open their hearts to ad experiences.
So you mentioned the love of libraries and the book attachment. So knowing what you know, what do you think? We get this question a lot, and we've been pondering it. What do you think holds for the future of libraries, or what do you see libraries looking like, in the future based on what you found?
This is Deirdre. I'll take that one first. So there is no way in HE double hockey sticks that libraries are going away anytime soon. And that came through very, very strongly in this study, not just from the people who love their library, not just from the people who are spending their weekend days at the library enjoying reading in the comfy chairs that the library offers. We heard that from people who self-identify as non-library users, but they believe, and Pew reflects this as well, that even the people who don't use the library believe very strongly that the library is a cornerstone of their community. It's really important. And as Christy mentioned, that came through really strongly in the association between public libraries and public schools as well. We had one participant who talked about the connection between public libraries and public schools as the future path for free thinkers, which I thought was a really interesting perspective, seeing as he hadn't been in his public library in years. But he felt very strongly that it was very important. I think that there are a lot of opportunities for the public library, not just in continuing to be a really important place for people who love to read and who want to read, but in providing opportunities for people who have lost their job to have a place to learn, sort of really, as Christy mentioned, to learn the whole new system that you have to know to even apply for a job these days. We also, in the course of another contextual inquiry study on college students, we talked to a 16-year-old high school student who, at 10 years old, had moved to the United States from Sierra Leone. She couldn't speak a word of English. She couldn't write anything, not even her name, but she very quickly identified the public library as the place where she could go to get the resources she needed to catch up to her peers. And she actually now has a job, an after-school job at the public library, because she identifies it as her happy place. She wants to be there during her free time, but also because she reads so much now that she knew if she took a job at the public library, they'd increase the cap on what she was allowed to check out at one time. So there are, for every one person who says that the public library, they believe strongly in the public library, but they don't use it, there are stories like that about people who wouldn't survive without the public library.
And this is Christy. I also think that there's a huge opportunity and that the library is the third space for so many people. And I'm a big advocate of the library as third space. And even people who weren't using the public library very much now, many of our participants talked about the library at some point as being that for them. It's not home, it's not work or school, but it's somewhere that they can go and, interact with information, either have entertainment, get an answer, even just have a space to sit. And especially as libraries are building out other opportunities, either having community centers associated, having maker spaces, they really are filling that need, because for so many people there isn't anything else. You get up in the morning, you go to work, and you go home, and having another space within your community that feels like yours and feels safe, not necessarily always safe as we think of, so safe and comfortable, I think is really important.
Great. How much impact do you think Facebook or other social media can have on library users?
That's a great question. This is Deirdre. It depends on the user. So I have so we had participants who were public library members, and we also talked to librarians over the course of the study, just to keep us honest, to make sure we were asking the right questions. And one of those librarians works in a public library here, and they have a marketing librarian, and he works hand in hand with the marketing librarian. And what they've found is that Twitter is for people all over the country and all over the world who want to have a discussion about the big picture of the role of libraries in society. It's not necessarily as good for specific announcements about what's going on in the community. Facebook, on the other hand, it can be active Facebook users tend to be the ones who are going there to find out about what's going on in their community. So talking about what's going on in the library via Facebook can have an immediate impact. It can bring people into the library. It can bring people to that programming. So that's sort of that's my understanding of the two different roles that those social media platforms can play for libraries.
And as a former social media librarian, because I was part of my job as the teen librarian, I'll say that Facebook is a huge time investment. So I know for a lot of libraries that don't have somebody who can be dedicated and spend a lot of time, it can be challenging because they change their rules every few months. They change the algorithm. They make it very hard for people to see what you're writing, what you're posting. But with that said, if you're able to put in a little bit of time to kind of follow Facebook user groups and see what the best practices are, it definitely is worth it. When I was my last public library job, we were advocating for a new building, and the Facebook conversations were probably among the best because there really wasn't anywhere else that, unless you have a local online forum, it's really hard to have those immediate conversations when people aren't actually in the same room.
Great, thank you. Did your research cover the use of visible name tags as adding approachability to librarians? And if it did, could you talk a little bit about that?
Our research did not specifically cover the use of name tags. Not a single participant brought up finding out a librarian's name via a name tag. However, the librarians at my public library all wear name tags. I knew their names a long time ago, but I think that could go a long way toward personalizing that experience with the librarian. Christy, so we talked a lot about the fact that there are a lot of introverts in the library profession, and I think that's probably less true in public libraries as it is in some other types of libraries. I myself am an introvert, and I have a hard time putting myself out there. If I were tasked with marketing myself in the way that Christy said, let's market our librarians, I'd probably be terrified. But the idea of small changes like name tags, like pictures on shelf talkers, like, okay, I know video rental stores have kind of gone by the wayside, but my favorite part of the video rental store was walking in and seeing the staff pick section and watching what Ben liked to watch. So I think that can go a long way towards just personalizing that experience and helping your members make a personal connection with their librarians, which to me is scary, but can also be really wonderful.
Great. We are almost out of time, so I just wanted to know if either of you had any final thoughts or tips on the public library. What we can do as public librarians to make our library stronger, our community stronger, be more visible in our community. Anything on that?
I think that I think marketing your librarians and helping not just the members who are already in your library, but the community members who don't know as much about the librarians, I really think that the librarians themselves are the key to opening that door and forming that personal connection. And as I mentioned, that can be really hard because all of a sudden you're vulnerable, you're exposed to your community, but I think the rewards are potentially really, really great because it's through that personal connection that the library becomes really meaningful to people. So I just want to say that thank you again for this second chance. Thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it. We would love to connect with you on Twitter, on LinkedIn, via email. If there were questions that we didn't get to answer today, please feel free to get in touch with us. And I'm going to kick it to Christy for her thoughts.
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of that. I had an emergency call from my son's daycare. But yes, please get in touch with us. I love hearing from public libraries. I think that my favorite part of my job is getting to continue to be a librarian's librarian and help you do your job better. So we would love feedback. And thank you again for coming this week, and we hope to have a chance to talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Deirdre and Christy. And I wanted to just let all of you know that the recording and these slides will be available to you later on today. You will get that information in your follow-up email. So again, thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Christy, for a great presentation. And thanks to all of you for listening in, for your questions and your participation today. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. So long.